My life felt like a dream come true, one of those you're afraid to wake up from. I was about to marry Julian, the man I had pictured for years as the father of my children, my life partner, my safest haven. Everything was prepared with care. The flowers, the menu, the music, even the small details only we understood. My mother cried tears of joy as I looked at myself in the mirror, dressed in my white gown, thinking that I had finally found true happiness. What I didn't know was that this wedding, which was supposed to seal a love story, would actually mark the beginning of my greatest tragedy. From the start, I knew I couldn't walk down the aisle without my best friend, Laura Jenkins, by my side. She was more than just a friend. She was my soul sister, my confidant, the only person who knew every corner of my heart. That's why I chose her as my maid of honor, without a second thought. No one questioned my decision. Everyone knew how deep our connection was. She smiled with a genuine-looking tenderness as she helped me with my veil and made sure everything was perfect. What I didn't know was that behind her sweet eyes, a dark secret was hiding, a secret that would destroy my life from the inside out. We wanted an intimate wedding, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. That's why we chose an elegant estate in the hills of Virginia, surrounded by century-old trees and blooming gardens. The place was magical, with a stately stone manor, cozy rooms, and a hall with high ceilings and enormous windows that let in the warm light of the setting sun. There, surrounded by our families and closest friends, we dreamed of celebrating our love and starting a new life together. Nothing seemed out of place. Everything felt harmonious. But that same place would soon witness the most painful collapse of my existence. We had rented the entire estate for the weekend so that our parents and the wedding party could stay the night before and after the wedding. We wanted it to be more than just an event. We wanted it to be a moment of togetherness, shared laughter, and joyful anticipation. The night before, we all had dinner together on the patio, which was lit by string lights, with soft music playing and glasses of wine in our hands. Julian seemed calm, even affectionate, and Laura never left my side, just as always. No one suspected that behind all that calm, a storm was brewing that would change our lives forever. That night, I went to bed with a heart full of hope, mentally replaying every moment of the day, convinced that I had finally found happiness. I fell asleep late, feeling nervous but happy, picturing the moment I would walk toward Julian in my white dress. The next morning, the first rays of sun came through the window, and I woke up with an energy I hadn't felt since I was a little girl. Laura was the first one to enter my room, bringing me breakfast with a smile that I now remember as a mask. I felt grateful, excited, and secure. I couldn't have known that nothing was real anymore. When it was time, my father took my arm, and we walked toward the garden where everyone was waiting for us. The soft sound of string instruments, the white petals on the ground, the tearful eyes of our loved ones. Everything looked like it was from a storybook. Julian was waiting for me at the end of the aisle with glistening eyes and the smile that had made me fall in love with him so many times. I walked toward him, holding back tears, convinced that I was taking the most important and beautiful step of my life. No one could have seen that my "I do" would actually be the beginning of my greatest heartbreak. When the officiant asked if we accepted to join our lives, I didn't hesitate for a second. My voice was shaky but firm as I said, "I do," my eyes full of love as I looked at Julian. He also said, "I do," with a smile, though for a moment I thought his expression dimmed right after he said it. I just figured it was nerves, that we all feel that little bit of anxiety when we take such a big step. We kissed to the sound of applause, surrounded by white flowers and tears of emotion. In that instant, I believed it was all worth it, that our love was real. The celebration was exactly as we had imagined, intimate, elegant, and full of joy. We ate under a starry sky with soft music playing in the background and candles lit at every table. There were moments of laughter, anecdotes, and hugs that seemed sincere, as if we were all a part of something eternal. Julian talked to our guests and laughed, but there was something distant in the way he looked at me. I didn't want to think too much of it. I thought he was just tired from all the planning and decided to enjoy every second. My father stood up, emotional, to toast our union, speaking of how proud he was of me and how he had watched our love grow. Everyone applauded, and Julian raised his glass with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, as if he were forcing the emotion. I looked at him, trying to find that usual spark, but all I found was a strange silence in his gaze. I thought that maybe I was just being too sensitive, that I shouldn't look for problems where there weren't any. But deep down, something inside of me was starting to crack, even though I didn't know it yet. After the party, we went up to the bridal suite together, a warm and elegant space we had decorated with flowers and candles to make it unforgettable. My heart was pounding, a mix of excitement and nerves, as I thought about how special this night, our first as husband and wife, would be. I closed the door softly, wanting to prolong the intimate moment, believing we were about to seal our story with love. Julian placed his watch on the nightstand, took off his shoes without looking at me, and sighed heavily. I went to hug him, and that's when I heard it. "I'm tired," he said, not looking at me, his tone dry and flat, as if I wasn't even there. I stood frozen, trying to figure out if it was a joke, if something had happened that I didn't see, but his face was serious, distant, and completely devoid of emotion or desire. He turned his back to me, unbuttoned his shirt, and went straight to the twin bed that was in a corner of the room. He didn't say goodnight or turn around. He just turned off the light, leaving the room in a silence that hurt more than any yell. I sat on the edge of the marriage bed, not knowing what to do with my body or my thoughts, feeling invisible on the most important night of my life. I waited for what felt like endless minutes for a gesture, a word, an explanation, but all I got was the sound of his quiet breathing from the other side of the room. I slowly lay down on the bed, unable to hold back the tears, trying to not make a sound so I wouldn't seem pathetic. The room smelled of fresh flowers, but inside my chest, everything was withering. And that's how I spent my first night as a wife, alone, confused, and with a broken soul. I don't know how long I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, wishing it was all a nightmare, that Julian would come over and hug me by surprise. But the hours passed, the silence was absolute, and his body remained still in the twin bed, as far from me as if we were two strangers. At some point, exhaustion won out, and I closed my eyes. But I couldn't have been asleep for more than 30 minutes, when a muffled sound woke me up with a jolt. I sat up, my heart racing, confused, trying to figure out where it was coming from. I turned my head, and Julian's bed was empty. I slowly got up, my bare feet on the cold floor, feeling a knot in my stomach that I couldn't explain. I walked to the door, opened it carefully, and heard the sound again. It was a short, stifled groan, as if someone was trying not to make noise. The hallway was dark, only lit by the faint light coming from a room at the end. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to convince myself that maybe it was a movie, a voice on the TV, anything logical, but something inside me already knew that I was about to hear what I should never have heard. I forced myself to move, still without making a sound. And that's when I remembered that the room belonged to my mother-in-law, Julian's mother. She had said at the end of the dinner that she was feeling sick and had to go into town to get some medicine. She hadn't been back since, and no one seemed to have worried about her absence. My mind began to piece together the impossible, but my heart refused to believe it. What was Julian doing in there in the middle of the night, in his mother's room, which was supposed to be empty? I took one more step. The groans continued. I moved down the hallway with a pounding heart and a cold sweat running down my back, trying to silence every step so I wouldn't alert whoever was inside. It wasn't just the noise that was bothering me anymore, but the fact that Julian wasn't in our room on our wedding night. And at that very moment, in that part of the house, something inside me started connecting loose pieces. Details I had ignored. Looks that hadn't seemed important before. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to imagine it. But my feet already knew where they were going, and my soul had a premonition. It was about to shatter. I stopped right in front of the door that belonged to my mother-in-law, the same one that was supposed to be empty that night, and I felt my hands shaking uncontrollably. From inside, the groans continued, lower now, as if someone was holding their breath, as if they knew someone was listening. I swallowed hard and put my ear to the wood, holding my breath for a moment so I could hear more clearly. A soft creak of the bed, a muffled sigh, and then a woman's voice. I closed my eyes tightly, wishing I was wrong, but I recognized it instantly. It was Laura. There was no doubt. Her voice was unmistakable. Broken whispers, a mix of pleasure and urgency, blended with little laughs that I had heard so many times in confidence. I felt a sharp blow to my chest, as if someone had knocked me to the ground without warning. I leaned against the wall, dazed, not knowing whether to scream, run, or pass out right there. Everything we had shared, all our secrets, the long teenage talks, the promises of loyalty, all came crashing down with that sound, and the worst was yet to come. And then I heard his voice, Julian's deep, unmistakable voice, whispering Laura's name between low gasps that left no room for doubt. I felt the ground disappear from under my feet, the air grow thick, and I was losing my breath. It was the voice of my husband, the man who just hours ago had promised me eternal love in front of everyone. And now he was there in the middle of the night, sharing the bed he had refused to share with me, with my best friend. The tears came without me being able to stop them, but I didn't make a single sound. I rested my forehead against the wall, shaking, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. I found it hard to understand how this could be happening on my wedding night, in the house where I believed everything was starting. Every word, every groan, was a dagger straight to my soul, and still, I didn't move. I decided to stay there, planted in front of the door, without making a sound, waiting for them to come out so I could face them. I needed to see their faces, hear their excuses, and confirm with my own eyes what I had already heard. Time became eternal, every minute a torture, and my heart beat against my chest with a wild force. I closed my eyes, opened them, and I was still there. I didn't leave. The door opened suddenly, and Julian came out, his shirt unbuttoned and his belt askew, running his hands through his hair as if he didn't expect to find anyone. When he saw me standing in front of him, he froze for a second, his eyes wide and guilt tattooed on his face. He didn't say anything. He just turned around as if looking for an explanation for his own betrayal. And then she appeared. Laura came out behind him, her hair disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her dress wrinkled, holding her heels in her hand. When she saw me, she froze, rooted to the spot, as if she had seen a ghost, unable to pretend, to run, or to hold my gaze. I didn't need any more proof. The image of the two of them, together, in silence, with guilt in their bodies, spoke louder than 1,000 words. And still, I dared to ask why. I stood in front of them without moving an inch, blocking their path, my body tense and my voice broken by anger and pain. I asked them how they could have done it, how they had the cold-bloodedness to betray me on my wedding night. Julian didn't know where to look. Laura didn't even try to pretend to be surprised. Silence was their first response, as if they expected me to just leave without saying anything. But I didn't move. I didn't stay silent. I didn't give them that way out. Then Julian raised his voice nervously and told me I was wrong, that nothing had happened, that he had only helped Laura pick up some things his mother had left in the room. His lie was so clumsy, so absurd, that for a moment it hurt even more than the betrayal itself. Laura didn't say a word. She just looked down while he kept inventing excuses, each one more fragile than the last. He looked at me as if I was the one losing control, but there was no more room for his theater. I told him I had heard everything, every whisper, every groan, every word they should never have shared between them. I told him he didn't need to say anything else, that his silence had already said it all. Then Julian dropped his shoulders, closed his eyes, and finally admitted it in a low voice, as if he no longer had the strength to keep up the charade. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't explain why he did it. He just said he had been confused for a while, as if that justified his betrayal. Laura burst into tears as soon as she heard his confession. She covered her face with her hands and began to repeat over and over that she was sorry, that she hadn't wanted to hurt me, that she didn't know how things had gotten to that point. Her crying didn't move me. It was too late for tears, too late for regrets. For years, she was the person I trusted most, and she had stabbed me in the back without a moment's hesitation. She was no longer my friend. She wasn't even a stranger. She was a threat. And in front of me, there was only an empty woman. I felt something inside me break into a million pieces, something that had no shape or name, but that held everything I was. My legs were shaking, my chest was burning, and I could barely breathe, as if the air was betraying me just like they had. I didn't cry anymore. There were no tears left, only a mute, dry rage that consumed me from within. My wedding had turned into a nightmare, and I was no longer the same person. I didn't say anything else. I went to the room, gathered my things without looking at anyone, and went down the stairs, my gown still on, my face burning, and my soul in pieces. No one followed me. I walked across the garden barefoot, ignoring the cold of the early morning and the fog that was beginning to cover the ground. I just wanted to get away, to disappear, to breathe air that didn't smell like a lie. And so I left without a goodbye, without an explanation, with a broken heart and my dignity intact. I walked for hours with no destination, down empty roads, my dress dragging in the dirt, and my makeup a sad shadow under my eyes. No one passed by, no one asked, and in a way, I was grateful that the world kept turning without knowing about my tragedy. I sat on a bench next to a dry field, shivering from the cold, replaying what I had heard and seen over and over again. I didn't understand when everything had gone so wrong. It was my wedding night, and I was alone, broken, and lost. When the sky began to lighten, I retraced my steps, guided more by exhaustion than by a conscious decision. The estate was still quiet, sleeping under the faint light of dawn, as if nothing had happened. I entered through the back door without a sound, feeling like an intruder in a place that just hours before had been the scene of my happiness. I didn't know what I was going to do, but something inside me needed to find closure. I couldn't leave without telling the truth. The dining room was filled with soft voices, plates of fruit, coffee mugs, and the smiles of strangers, as if everything were continuing its natural course. My parents, my in-laws, the wedding party. Everyone was chatting without knowing a thing, oblivious to what had happened in the darkness. I stood watching from the doorway, feeling a cold anger grow inside me at all the normalcy. No one asked about me. No one seemed to have noticed my absence. I quietly wiped my face, walked in, and asked for their attention. With a firm voice, calmer than I felt inside, I asked everyone to gather in the main living room. I didn't want any drama or to beat around the bush. I had something to say, and I wasn't going to wait any longer. My father looked at me with a worried expression. My mother stood up immediately, and one by one everyone came in, confused and expectant. I didn't see Julian or Laura among them, and that in itself said everything. As everyone took their seats, my eyes scanned the room, looking for them, hoping deep down for one last cowardly appearance. But neither Julian nor Laura was there. They hadn't dared to show their faces, and their absence confirmed everything without the need for a single word more. My parents realized it right away and looked at me with unease, as if they already knew that what I was about to say wasn't going to be minor. And then, without shaking, I spoke. I thanked them for being with me on what should have been the happiest day of my life, and then, without hesitation, I told them the truth. I said I had discovered Julian and Laura together in his mother's room on my wedding night, betraying me without shame or regret. I heard murmurs, saw furrowed brows and tense faces, and felt their disbelief. But my voice didn't break because for the first time in hours, I felt like I was regaining control. Silence took over the room like a wave that sweeps away everything in its path, and no one knew how to react at first. My mother covered her mouth. My in-laws looked down as if they couldn't bear the weight of the shame. Some people stood up, Others looked at me as if they couldn't believe it. No one said it wasn't true. No one tried to defend them because, deep down, everyone knew that I was not capable of lying about something like this. With a clear voice, I announced that I intended to annul the marriage, that I wanted nothing to do with Julian or Laura ever again, and that I hoped no one would try to convince me otherwise. I didn't want pity or sympathy, just respect for my decision. My father stood up and wrapped me in a silent, firm hug, as if telling me he was proud of me. No one applauded. No one protested. They let me go. As I left the room, I heard my mother-in-law quietly sobbing and her husband trying to comfort her without success. My own parents had reddened eyes, not from sadness, but from helplessness, from the anger of not having been able to protect me. I felt like I was leaving behind not just a wedding, but an entire version of myself that no longer existed. Disappointment hung in the air like a bitter perfume that everyone was breathing in. And in the middle of all that, I left without looking back. I left the estate without looking back, taking nothing with me but my dignity. The same dignity that, despite the pain, was still standing. The white dress was stained with dirt, tears, and a story that no longer belonged to me. I walked toward the road with my head held high, like someone who survives a storm without losing themselves. I didn't answer calls, messages, or questions. That part of my life was dead to me. When I got home, with my soul still raw, I contacted a lawyer and filed for divorce without delay. I didn't want days of reflection, family advice, or second chances. I wanted to close that chapter with the same firmness with which I had lived it. I handed over the documents and refused to see Julian again, not to talk or to sign. I was not the same woman who had said, "I do," at that altar. Weeks later, I was told that Julian had moved in with Laura as if their betrayal had been part of a romantic plan. They walked around together as if nothing had happened, as if the harm they had done to me didn't exist. He thought he had found true love, the kind that justifies the unjustifiable, but life sooner or later gives back what you sow, and theirs didn't take long to rot. A few months later, rumors began to circulate about their constant arguments, yells that the neighbors could hear through the walls. Laura no longer smiled with the same confidence as before, and Julian spent hours outside the house avoiding her. What had started as a forbidden passion turned into routine, distrust, and blame. She had destroyed a friendship for a man who didn't know how to love anyone, and he was getting bored again. One day, out of the blue, Julian disappeared from the apartment he shared with Laura, leaving her with only a note and a lie. He had cheated on her with another woman, a younger one, a woman who didn't know their history. He had repeated his pattern because it was never love. It was only ego and a whim. Laura was left alone, devastated, without a partner, without friends, and without credibility. And she finally understood what she had done to me. Laura, without Julian and without anyone's support, slowly lost the little she had left. Her old friends turned their backs on her. My family never spoke to her again, and her world crumbled like a sandcastle. She tried to find support, but she no longer had anyone to call. No one forgets a betrayal like that. And she finally felt what it means to be completely alone. I, on the other hand, decided to throw myself into my work, to rebuild myself from within, without needing revenge or explanations. I opened my eyes, surrounded myself with new people, and learned to make decisions from a place of calm. I invested in myself, in my business, in my ideas, and little by little, the sadness gave way to clarity. I discovered that I could be happy without depending on anyone, and for the first time, I began to feel proud of myself. I opened a second store, then a third, and in less than a year, my name began to resonate in the industry with respect and admiration. Customers, suppliers, and trade magazines all wanted to know who this woman was who had built a small empire from nothing. But I wasn't looking for recognition. I was just looking for stability. The independence I had always dreamed of was something I was building with my own two hands, and no one could take that away from me. 3 years passed. My life was different, serene, solid, without turmoil or open wounds. It no longer hurt to remember that night. On the contrary, it reminded me of how far I had come since then. I had left Julian, Laura, and everything they represented behind. I had learned to be alone without feeling empty, and just when I wasn't looking for it, the unexpected happened. It was at a business meeting during a presentation with other entrepreneurs that I met him. His name was Daniel Jackson, and he spoke with a quiet confidence that wasn't intimidating but captivating. He didn't try to impress me or sell himself. He just listened to me carefully and asked me questions no one had ever asked before. I didn't feel butterflies. I felt peace, and in that moment, I knew something was about to begin. With Daniel, everything was different from the start. No urgency, no empty promises, just sincere conversations, mutual respect, and silences that weren't awkward. He didn't pressure me or try to fill any void. He accompanied me naturally, letting me set the pace. Slowly, I began to look forward to his messages, to hear his voice, to miss the way he looked at me. It wasn't a crazy passion, it was something deeper. It was a peace I had never felt with anyone before. At first, I didn't even trust my own happiness, as if I was just waiting for something to go wrong at any moment. But Daniel understood without me having to explain it. He was patient, steadfast, and constant. With every gesture, he showed me that you can love without destroying, without lying, without using another person as a life raft. I learned to trust again, not because he asked me to, but because the way he was with me allowed me to. And with that, I finally healed the wound Julian had left. When we officially started dating, everything flowed naturally, with no need to hide or justify myself. The people around me noticed the change. I was no longer the woman who survived. I was the woman who lived. With Daniel, I shared trips, projects, and simple moments that became unforgettable. He didn't promise me a future. He offered me a solid present, and after everything I had been through, that meant so much more. I don't know how, but Julian found out I was with someone and soon sent me a message full of what was supposed to be nostalgia. He said he was happy to know I was doing well, that he sometimes thought about what we lost, and that he wished me the best. But between the lines, you could sense the bitterness of someone who can't stand to see the person they thought they destroyed be happy. I didn't respond. I owed nothing to the man who took everything from me and still couldn't break me. One afternoon, without warning, Julian showed up at the door of my store, looking thinner, his eyes dull, his clothes looking as if life was a heavy weight on his shoulders. He asked for just 5 minutes. He said he needed closure, that he hadn't stopped thinking about me. I looked at him calmly, with no anger, no sadness. It no longer hurt. He no longer mattered. I asked him to talk quickly, that I didn't have time to look back, and he started saying he had made a mistake, that he had been a coward, that he had lost me because he didn't know how to appreciate me. I listened without interrupting, with no emotion on my face, like someone listening to rain fall from behind a closed window. When he finished, I looked at him firmly and told him he no longer had any power over me, that we no longer existed, that he shouldn't think he could get back what he himself had destroyed. I made it clear that I didn't want to see him again, that there was no room for him in my present or my future. There were no insults or yelling, just a firm, cold, final refusal. Julian tried to smile, as if he still believed he could make me waver. But he wasn't the man who once made me tremble. Now he just seemed small, foreign, and irrelevant. I asked him to leave, and this time I was the one who closed the door. Before he left, his eyes filled with contained frustration, as if he couldn't stand to see that I was happy without him. He mumbled something about how fast I had moved on, as if he wanted to hurt me, but I didn't react. What would have broken me before just slid right off me now? He left without saying goodbye, his shoulders slumped, knowing he had lost me forever, because there was no going back. When silence returned, I sat at my desk and took a deep breath, as if I could finally live my own life without shadows. I didn't feel euphoria or triumph, just a sense of calm. The kind that comes when you know you have closed the toughest chapter without getting your hands dirty. I was no longer a victim, a survivor, or anyone's ex. I was me, whole, peaceful, at peace. Daniel came in a few minutes later, not knowing what had happened, but when he saw me, He hugged me without saying a word. He didn't need an explanation. He just offered his presence, his support, his unconditional love. I looked at him and knew that life, with all its wounds, had brought me to him for a reason. By his side, I didn't feel dizzy. I felt at home. And I finally understood what true love was. I realized that nothing in life is guaranteed, that even the most promised love can break without warning, and that loyalty doesn't always come from the people closest to you. But I also discovered that pain is not the end of anything, but the beginning of something we can't yet imagine. The ruins of what I once was gave me the perfect ground to rebuild myself, firmer, freer. I learned that anyone who survives such a deep betrayal not only recovers, but is reborn. And I had been reborn. Today, I look back without anger or resentment because the past no longer has a hold on me. I'm still with Daniel. My store continues to grow, and my life is peaceful, bright, and full. I no longer seek approval. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I only need to be true to what I feel and who I am. This is not a story of revenge, but of dignity, because my happy ending didn't come from another person. It came from me. I never ran into Julian or Laura again, and I didn't need to. Not because I had forgiven them, but because they no longer occupied any space within me. Sometimes people ask me if I would trust someone again after what I went through, and I always answer the same thing. Not only did I trust again, but I learned to choose better. Daniel didn't come to save me. He found me whole and chose me that way. I know my story isn't unique. There are many women who have been betrayed, humiliated, or abandoned just when they thought they had it all. But if I want to leave them with anything, it's this. Don't let yourself be broken by someone who doesn't know how to love. Don't stay where there's no respect. The strongest love is the one you have for yourself. Everything else, when it comes, should just be a complement, never the center. Today, I'm writing this from the terrace of my home with a cup of tea while Daniel reads a book beside me and the sun begins to set. Peace doesn't sound like fireworks. It sounds like shared silence, mutual respect, and knowing that nothing is missing. If you ever thought true love wasn't for you, let me tell you something. It doesn't come when you expect it. It comes when you finally choose yourself. Sometimes, when I walk alone through the streets of my neighborhood, I stop in front of a storefront and see my reflection. I no longer look for anyone's approval in my eyes, or for the love I dreamed of as a child. I only look to recognize myself, and there I am, with scars, yes, but also with a strength that I used to confuse with weakness. I learned that pain breaks you, but it also builds you up again, more aware, more you. I keep a box with memories of that day that changed everything, not to torture myself, but to not forget how far I've come since then. Every dry flower, every photograph, every detail of the dress is a testament to a version of me that died that night and gave way to the woman I am today. I don't throw that box away. I embrace it and respect it, because without it, I wouldn't be here. Daniel sometimes looks at me as if he doesn't understand how someone so wounded can love with so much calm. And I smile at him, not because the past doesn't hurt, but because it no longer controls me. When love is real, it doesn't demand absurd sacrifices or ask you to make yourself small. True love begins when you decide not to beg for affection, when you know that whoever chooses you must choose you freely. And so my story ends, not with a kiss in the rain or with a fairy tale wedding. It ends with a cup of tea, a hand to hold, and a peaceful heart. Because I understood that the real happy ending isn't finding the perfect man, but becoming the woman who no longer needs to be saved from anything, just to live in peace, in truth, and in love. Did you like my story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.